Waheguru ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru ji ki Fateh.
So thank you Veer ji so much for inviting us here. बहुत बढ़िया लग गया थे आन के to connect with the youth and start having conversations on issues that you guys have been tackling with United Sikh Youth Federation Australia. So do you want to tell me a little bit about United Sikh Youth Federation Australia, why you set it up and what the need was?
For starters, thank you so much for coming down to Australia. It was very hard to get you in your busy schedule, but dhanwad toda dilo bahut for someone, a role model like yourself, to come here. So essentially, Veerji, in Australia we have a lot of jathebandiyas. Individually they're doing a great job. Prachar kardne, some are doing history lessons, some are helping professional Sikhs, which is amazing. However, there's no platform where we can have panthic conversations. There seems to be a problem with parents. Dardene, after 1984, our parents have been traumatized. So there is no environment for the youth to even bring up a dialogue, let alone what the conversation is. We can't even have a dialogue. If we go up to certain jathebandis, they don't want to approach it. So a bunch of Singhs of like 3 or 4 of us got together, and that's when I started getting in contact with you. We thought about it, we should bring up something, a new platform where the youth can now get together and we can have open dialogues without anyone judging, without anyone passing comments, without anyone we can have mature dialogue and we can get a point across. So that's when United Sikh Youth Federation came in action, where our aim was get the Naujawan with the right mindset, with the same nishana as us, and let's start having dialogues, let's start making an atmosphere, setting up a stage where we can have these conversations. So that was the beginning of our journey.
Oh, that sounds awesome. It was like similar for us as well in the UK. When we were growing up, like there was a really powerful Panthak scene, and especially in our Gurdwara, Punjabi speaking elders. There was a lot of programs around our Shaheeds. There was conversation, there was dialogue, but we found that when it came to actually this idea of representing our community, especially to Gore and especially to the government, the conversations that we were having in our Gurdwara, they weren't necessarily filtering through. So that kind of that divide that the Indian government had created, that Khalistan equals extremism and terrorism, that they had enforced with state violence, that kind of dominated the narrative, and there was this like reluctance, and I think it was as well, there's like a language barrier. Those professional quote-unquote Sikhs that we thought as a Qawm would represent us in those areas, they often didn't. They instead started like mimicking the rhetoric of the government, and instead ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਫਰਜ਼ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਗੱਲ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਦੱਸਣੀ, ਉਹ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗ ਪਏ, and you still see that. I mean, it's prevalent today. So it's like amazing that the Naujawan are like picking up, right, and like trying to disrupt that silence.
Yeah, it's really challenging. We can talk about UK, it's like 15 years ahead or 20. Like I said, we can't talk. Our Gurdwara don't let us have these dialogues. We have to karange to look ke karna penda apne chote groups, and so it's really challenging. But I guess you can now direct us on how the stage 1 is, what we can do from here on, the steps we need to take to create a platform where we can now have these dialogues openly.
So what do you think, like, I mean, we were discussing this before as well, right? Like, what do you think are the challenges that you face here?
Well, number 1 is ekta, but then we can't have that without a nishana. Now, let's go a little bit more forward. The youth don't even know what the nishana is. Now, if we go a little bit more forward, very selected few youth here know that there is a problem. So we can talk about the nishana, but our youth today, they're so distracted with their personal jivans that they don't want to have contribution towards a panth, and they don't even know there is a problem that exists for them to contribute. So, I mean, when I'm speaking to youth, sometimes I forget that I have done a little bit more research, and then talking to them, they have no idea what I'm talking about. So I guess we have to go right from the basics and start doing prachar of the genocide that the Indian government has been doing for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think like more than that as well, like there seems to be this like separation, right? Like Sikhi is like a purely religious path,
yes,
and this idea, this quote unquote politics, is separated out. And what we found is like, this label of politics is applied to topics that we don't actually want to speak about. So it's a code for those issues that we're either afraid to talk about, or because we've experienced trauma and violence from the state, there's a reluctance to talk about those issues. So we distance that topic by saying we don't want to be political.
Politics.
Yeah. So what's actually meant when we say we don't want to be political is we don't want to touch those issues for which the community has suffered. We want to be safe, right?
Yeah.
And we find that, like, in my experience, I've seen that, like, this desire to pursue careers, right?
Yeah.
And like the career is going to give us a place of belonging in this world, or like joining political parties, that's going to give us the representation we need. But in both of those spaces, you have to compartmentalize your Sikhi. You have to separate, the political out, the state, the government. They deal with the political, we deal with, just the religious, and Sikhi is something that, is there just for your personal jivan, as you're saying.
It's a separate thing.
Yeah.
100%. Today, the Sikhs, so what happens is, like you said, the topics such as 84 genocide, politics involved. So what's happened, the word politics has now been tarnished. It's become so bad. And in terms of MPs, our youth today, they look forward to getting higher seats in the parliament. But do you think that's going to make a difference at all?
I mean, like, we did like a video on this idea on Sikh representation at the NSYF YouTube, and the PANTH can never be represented within those structures, right? And that type of representation we need, especially around like our Sikh issues of our Qawm, they're never going to come from those structures. And if you're like happy being like Australian or British or Canadian,
Australian Sikh,
if you're happy, just leaving your future up to the Australian government and or the British government, then you can find a representation, as an Australian citizen. But as an Anandapurabasi, that representation is only going to come from our indigenous sovereign structures, right? So it becomes difficult, it goes back to the issue of our displacement, right? From Punjab, we're in these countries and we're searching for a definition of ourselves. We're searching for a space to just exist and belong. We're searching for home, and it's a harsh reality. But like, we have to question what does home mean, like in the diaspora, and how have we arrived in the diaspora, and like, have we arrived anywhere, and like, what does it mean to belong? And those are like really big questions, and I think we have to work through them, and that's why it's important to have one take jathebandiya, so we can start answering these questions. Because for me, it's like, you can't separate Khalistan out of who we are. That's like saying tusi saal lene band kar do. It's impossible. It's a part, that desire of azadi is something that we share with generations of Sikh, right? But that we need to have space to have those conversations. That's a healthy dynamic. Creating a dynamic where it says we can't talk about this, but we can talk about this. We're going to talk only about religion, but we're not going to talk about politics. That's not healthy, and that's I would say that's not a Sikh way to live. Karke, the reason we don't want to talk about this idea of politics is it's dar, right? Yeah,
dar, and it's in the whole generation. Because majority of the time when I speak to the youth, they feel comfortable talking to me one by one in person, and most of them will say, their narrative will be, we won't be able to get back to India. Sanu India nahi jaan denge. They'll pick us up, like Brother Jaggi now recently, 2 years ago. They've arrested him, no charge sheet at all, no evidence whatsoever. And what happens is, they've sent a message from India that we will get you no matter what. And now that message now is set into our parents' mind. You guys are next. So we're living in an atmosphere of fear. Like, it's become more than ever now because we're less in numbers. Panthic dialogue is less. The atmosphere is just career banao apna, piche pul jao. Career banao, politics, you're not involved. Don't get involved in politics. It's bad. But just make your career up. Ek hai part kari jao. So, and it's from my family as well, majority of the time we speak to them, they say for them Sikhi Jeevan sticks with just doing part. Outside of that, there is no Panthik Seva, Langar Vartalenya, but they don't like, another pillar is the political part, which we're running away from.
Yeah, and we kind of like hand it over to the state, right?
To them.
Yeah, and I find it like heartbreaking, like that there's this spoken fear around the Indian state and its violence. Like literally, we hear this, like wherever I've been in the diaspora, I've heard this. You know, Punjab hega hi hega, right? Like, but throughout the diaspora, it's a spoken fear. It's not like something that, you know, we don't talk about. We openly talk about it, especially in Sikh spaces and in our homes. That if we, you know, engage in Panthic activism, if we talk about Khalistan, we're going to, you know, potentially suffer violence from the Indian state, or if we go back home, we'll be arrested, or our families back home will suffer, and that is like something that, as a community, we need to address. Like, we're existing in a state of like repression as a people, that we can't even articulate that we want our azadi. We can't even articulate, you know, what the Indian state has done. And that's, for me, as a Sikh activist, you know, as, you know, somebody who's, you know, has dard for the Panth, what I personally like really struggle to understand, people that rise to positions of prominence or power within, you know, these nation states, that they will actively like erase Khalistan, and they become part of that culture of silencing and suppressing, that, you know, we're successful because we haven't spoken about Khalistan, and this is something that we cannot speak about, it's something that we won't speak about, or when they do speak about it, it's in the terms of the Indian state, and it's full of fear, it's full of, you know, it's a bad idea, it's not going to work, it's dangerous, all of these like fears of dealing with your own like hopes and dreams of a people. Like, we don't deal with those types of, you know, we don't have that attitude when we're dealing with our family's like future, right? We don't think, oh, you know, it's hopeless, what are we going to do, you know, like, let's just like give up, right? So to have, you know, Khalistan spoken about in such negative ways by those people that have like huge platforms and privileges, there's a huge disconnect, because amongst the Naujwan and the Panthic grassroots, there's hope, there's like so much pyar for like our azadi, for our shaheeds, and those individuals that have like huge platforms and positions of privilege, they talk about Khalistan in very, very negative terms, and in the terms dictated by the violence of the Indian state, or the violence of, like, you know, these countries that we've come to call home. And it comes, and a lot of the time the rhetoric is like massively uninformed, and is based on just like, you know, nothing beyond like media articles, I'd say, nothing beyond like
nothing
newspaper
at all.
Articles.
Very selected few channels are Republic TV. They all watch the same shows. So the concept of having our ministers in our countries will help us in any way, that's completely flawed, because at the end of the day, they're only going to speak for the constitution. I feel like a lot of the people in our Panth, we can say, they speak about issues, but just to get support of the Qawm, but they don't go past that. Like, they will speak of certain topics like Khalistan, they will say it, but they won't go much further. They just use it enough to gain the support of the people. But again, galani kar deni hai.
Yeah, that's another crisis in itself, right? Like how Khalistan is used as like a symbol, you know, of Panthic legitimacy.
Abused.
Yeah, completely. But how have you been, like, you know, disrupting, like, you know, this silence and, like, you know, these kind of negative dialogues? What have you found that's been successful, and like, what's your journey been like with Panthic activism?
It's because I have seen a lot of negative feedback, but it's because of uninformed information. No one knows what it is. No one knows the history of Khalistan. No one knows when the word first came up. All they know is that Indian channel says it, that's as far as it goes. Speaking to the youth, for their mindset, they think things like Khalistan, if it is, Hindus will not live in there, other people will not live, which is completely opposite, because Khalsa Raj dictates anyone can live in the Raj freely, openly, without any damage whatsoever. So this idea that Hindus will get killed, this will happen since the Black Cats in '84. They've had Black Cats go disrupt the Amritaris, go kill Hindus, and what that fear has like engraved into us. I met this auntie uncle a few weeks ago at the park, and we're talking about '84, and they're like, "Sade samne Sikh aise." They had fake beards and they started like killing the Hindus. And so what happens is, even now when we speak to the youth here, they don't know what they're talking about. All they know is that Khalistan, terrorism, kill Hindus. And this is becoming a big problem, because luckily only your NSYF has a lot of good information. So now we're using that to show to the youth the resources which are reliable.
So what have you found, like what's been successful for you in Australia? Like, you know, we talk about there's like so many similarities, right, between the challenges that we face and like, you know, what works, right? You have this amazing space here in this library, and you know, you have like a really solid group of Naujawan with you.
Elders, a lot of elders are unsupportive. Jo si karde pe hain, it takes a bit courage, but a lot of elders do not support us. It's our gurdwaras aren't supporting us. Biggest is the fear, man. It goes back to fear again.
What have you found that successful? What, like, you know, what have you managed to do so far?
So amongst our local youth now, we have now successfully sat down and we have had a dialogue. What do you think a version of Khalistan is? So amongst our youth, it's the local United Sikh Youth Federation group. For them now, they've understood the definition of Khalistan. So we've started doing classes now. Get a group of Singh who are interested in it, especially after your last event, and we get together and we start going over things. What is definition of Khalistan? Also related to with a Sikh point of view, what is Raj? Not from what we see European democracy, but how we did Raj. So educating our youth about how our ancestors did Raj and compare to how we can do that today, and then letting them know this is Khalistan, is helped a fair bit. Waheguru ji ka Khalsa, Waheguru ji ki Fateh.
राज बिना नहीं धर्म चले है, धर्म बिना सब चले मले है।